My name is Pete Merlo. Welcome to the Emerald Channel intake. The structure you see behind me is the intake, or the second intake, and the current intake for the city of Buffalo. All the fresh water supplied comes through that structure. The intake is a facility which takes in all the fresh water into the city of Buffalo. Comes through that structure. It's a 3-story structure. Actually, it was a manned facility back in the day. The reason for this is there was ice accumulation along the perimeter of the structure, and this had to be removed. And this occurred until probably the 50s when the ice boom was installed. You go in, it has a center well where all the fresh water comes into, settles, very quiescent. In fact, that location where the intake is now currently is called the Emerald Channel. The reason it is because of the clarity of the water. It's really an ideal location for an intake. The first step in the treatment process is really having an ideal raw water source. In fact, this is the second intake that was installed for the city of Buffalo. The first one was installed right below the Peace Bridge, and that served for about 20 years until there was a pollution epidemic, actually a typhoid epidemic that came down through the influence of surface water. Once this happened, the city of Buffalo realized it needed another location. And after surveying, looking at how the river flows and interacts between Lake Erie and Niagara, that location was chosen because it's the most quiescent area in the river, and it's an ideal source. So once you go out there, it's actually called that Emerald Channel because the water has an emerald look to it. You can see that not only outside the facility, but also inside in that center well. Also, in that facility, if you'll notice, there was, as I said before, a boiler. You had 3 stories, you had locker facilities. This was truly a manned facility, and there was week shifts that individuals come out there, spend the week. When the ice boom was installed, this minimized or really prevented any ice accumulation on there. And really, you've seen the operation from that point forward as you see today. The facility has been restored. Actually, the last time it was upgraded was in the early to mid-90s. There was a $5 million project to update the roof, the center well, the railings, bring it up to current codes, make sure all the gates. We wanted to make sure that the water kept flowing in there because, again, at one time, that served about 150 million gallons per day into the city of Buffalo. We're about half that now, but still all the water that goes into the city comes through that structure. When you look at the intake, there are 8 gates on the perimeter, and that allows the water from Lake Erie to come into that center well. And there's an open water reservoir in the center of that intake. That water then, which is very quiescent, enters into a center shaft. There's 4 gates that allows that. That center shaft goes down 50 feet into bedrock. It's a 12-foot diameter shaft, and then it meets a 12-foot or 12 by 12 tunnel 50 feet below the lake bed, and that has been tunneled, mined, under Lake Erie, and it goes from the intake structure all the way to Colonel Ward, which is about a mile offshore. At that point, the tunnel comes back up vertically. The water that enters our treatment plant, it is pumped one more time, lifted about 20 feet, and it goes through our process of treatment by gravity. So really, it goes from the lake, through the intake tunnel, through 12 by 12 concrete tunnel underground, into our plant, and it's only lifted one time, 20 feet, and then by gravity again, and then it's pumped one more time and pressurized, and that's what you see at the tap. A little bit of history on that building, and if you look at the way intakes are installed today, you really don't see that type of structure. Some of the beautiful things about that is the way it was constructed. The type of construction allowed this building to not only serve 100 plus years, but we're going to get another 100 years out of that structure. About 10 feet above water down, the walls are 20 feet thick of concrete. They use mass concrete, which really anchors that facilities in place. And what they did is the actual shell of that building, they constructed that offshore. Then they actually floated that out there and dropped it down, and then were able to build inside, build up. So the construction techniques used at the time, I was very impressed with when you look at and you can see what they were able to do at the turn of the century. In terms of the type of construction, the mining operations, and really be able to bring that whole project to fruition. At the turn of the century, you see a lot of that type of architecture in our facility, in the plant. It's very beautiful. That also was incorporated as part of that structure. It was built like that because, again, it was a manned facility. You had to have people out there. It needed to be well built, well constructed to handle those conditions. And if you look at that intake, it was built very similar to Colonel Ward and the rest of the treatment plant. The last piece that's really unique about that structure is the crow's nest. You go out there, you take a look, you can see all over, has a great vantage point. That was constructed for two reasons. A, you needed something up there to go out, be able to look, visualize. You want to see the whole intake. You also needed something for navigation. We actually work with the Coast Guard. We have a navigation light out there. We change out annually to make sure that it's working and operating, because you never know when boaters come in, there's still an active waterway. We need to actually work from the navigation standpoint as well as the intake standpoint. I remember as a kid driving through the city, pointing out to that structure, what is that? And I always envisioned it was maybe a 20-foot room, maybe that big. The first time I went out there, it floored me in terms of the size, how big it was, especially the first time I walked through those doors and it opened up. It was enormous. I couldn't believe it. I can only try to describe to you how impressive that structure is and really the impact visually. And I'm sure anybody gets to experience that would agree with me. It's a wonderful experience, and the size of it. Not only mention the interior of that structure. You're out there, you're on the deck, you go up in the crow's nest. It's a beautiful view of the city. I look down, I can see the Peace Bridge. I see the shoreline, I see Colonel Ward, I see downtown Buffalo, I see Canada. It's one of the most beautiful vistas I've ever seen.